Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to After the Roll, The Legend of Vox Machina. My brain is a little bit melty. I hope that my co-host is not the same. How are you tonight, Billy?
You know what? I'm doing well. I'm gonna attempt to be less melty, but this could get messy tonight.
It may. It wasn't even a messy episode. This
No,
episode,
not really.
yeah, there's a lot. I mean, there's parts of the episode I liked. There are some parts of the episode that I had issues with. How about yourself?
Yeah, I feel very strongly the same way. As we kind of briefly mentioned before starting this, it was a very linear episode. This happened, then this happened, then this happened. Um, and maybe there were a couple cool things and a couple question marks here and there, but um, it was just a very stepping stone episode, like just kind of like the last one. So,
And
um,
and that was therein lies the disappointment because
yeah,
I found that episode one was fantastic because it went over the top. It was again some of our one of our least favorite episodes, but it was over the top. It made promise. It told you what you're going to be on for the ride for the rest of the show, and then they were delivering hit after hit after hit. It was really going along. There's a couple of missteps along the way, but then now last episode and this episode very much are groundwork laying, preparing for the future, pushing towards the bigger thing, and didn't seem to have as tight of writing. Didn't seem to have as tight continuity for things that they have going on, and was disappointing to see a second groundwork laying episode in a row when it was kind of not even just laying groundwork. It was also kind of plugging gaps. Like, we're going to need to bring Pike back. We're going to need to do this stuff. So let's start filling holes and just slapping plaster up on the walls. And for how well it's been plugging along to this point, it was kind of disappointing.
yeah, and I agree. I thought that kind of the checklist. That's how I wrote down the episode. Was this was an episode that just had check boxes that they had to hit.
Yeah.
And yep, we did Pike. Yep, we finished that. Yep, we got to Percy's next nemesis. Yep, we and that's just how I felt at the end. Yep, we hit all the checkbox. Now we can go on to an episode that's going to be fun. I don't
But
know if that's kind of how you looked at it, but
yeah, but I'm kind of concerned that how is this going? Because this happened at the halfway mark with last
yeah,
episode and now this episode, and I'm afraid that this is going to be a precursor to what the rest of the season is going to be. Because again, I still haven't seen the entire series, and last episode and this episode very much were okay. Percy has 5 names on his list, six plus this vague sixth one, or however they have it
hmm
set up, five, like with the vague fifth one. And last episode they took off one. This episode they took off one. So are the remaining episodes just going to be Darcy or Percy taking off his hit list, and then the final episode being the face-off against the Briarwoods? If so, I'm going to be extremely disappointed in how that plays out.
I I think that's a really valid concern, especially after this episode, because although we do see Percy go up against another adversary, nothing happened to his story. All we saw was he had an altercation with him. It ended, and we're moving on. Like so, I would have liked to get something from the group besides some minor voiced concern in the moment. Um, I would like to know more. I would like to. It just it felt lacking to me, and I can see
Yeah.
where your concern for the next episodes come from. It's interesting to think that there's 4 episodes left after, or 3 episodes left, 9, 10, 11, 12, 4 episodes
Yeah,
left
for
after this one, because I don't know what else they can do. They're knocking off targets, and uh, what is left for 4 episodes? What is left?
well, my hope is that they go back to some of the stuff that they did because there was promises made in this episode that fell completely flat, in my opinion. When they're facing off against Professor Anders or Andres, and there is we're going to get into it, but when he's running out of the room and he's chasing after him, the professor is like, just like you're like, we're all like, I've got the exact quote down, but talking about like how his parents never really gave him, heeded his intelligence and gave him the props that he needed. And I was like, great, we're getting some info, a little bit of info dumping. We're getting this some backstory, and it's already we're off of that topic already. And the same thing when Percy finally reunites with Cassandra, and there's this like beautiful moment where they connect, and he's like, I looked back and I thought you were dead, and she's like, I thought you were going to be coming back for me, and that's it. And then it progresses on. Like that whole thing, like their reunion, they built up the reunion so hard. The last episode, the entire episode for the last one was, screw everybody else. I have to save my sister. Saves his sister, and it's like, met, like a little spit spat back and forth. And then they're off. And then one little barb where she says, running away has never been my strong suit. And that's it. Like it was just like, I was expecting so much more punch. So I'm hoping in the next episodes, they have it out. They have the conversation. They discuss. What have you been up to? Like, oh my God, you're still alive. It wasn't this thing of her being like, oh my God, you're still alive. I can't believe it. Or him being like, oh my God, you're like, Pike saved you, or Keela saved you, and this is amazing. It's a little bit of a brother-sister spat, and then let's move on with the rest of the story. So.
Right, and not to hammer too much in before we even get to a breakdown of the episode, but she drops a really nice nugget about being the Kestrel and being the one that's been feeding the information to the Resistance outside of the castle. It's one line. Yeah. She says, I was the one feeding information outside of the castle, and then they move on.
Yeah.
There's no recognition of everything that she's been trying to do or she did. She said it. No one cared, and they moved on.
Yeah, it was just kind of fast and flat, and I don't know. I found even the same thing a little bit with Pike, but let's dive into it. So it was a cold open. Again, it was a pretty cool cold open. They do good. I'm going to say not my favorite cold open of them. It's probably down pretty far in the ranks. But we see this beautiful ceremony with Pike, and they're trying to bring the Everlight back to her, and she is still trapped in the void. And then all of a sudden, she's being chased by this darkness, and they pull her out, and they tell her that this chamber is a massively powerful conduit, and you can't go back into it. It's too dangerous. So all of these much wiser elders are standing around saying it's too dangerous. You can't do that. This is our chamber. We know the danger. You're going to die if you do it. And Pike's response is, fine, I'll do it by myself. And they go, oh, okay. And they walk away. Which, again, was one of those things where I'm like, what?
Pike's storyline, and again, this wasn't part of the actual campaign. This is completely made up for the story. I just feel like it's been so weak. I expected so much more. I thought maybe she was adventuring or doing something, trying to find herself, which ultimately I guess she was trying to do. But the scenes that were given, this whole story arc for Pike could have been done in one episode. She could have had a standalone episode and had all this happen and figure it out, or even just be half an episode to cut up some of the monotony with the checklist episodes that we've had the past couple. And it would have helped take away from the constant jarring back and forth of going from the group to her to the group to her. Because as far as I can tell watching this has been maybe a day. We're not getting any information to say that she isn't just there for a couple hours.
Yeah, that's a big timeline fault that they have, is their timeline is non-existent. How long has passed for things is, and we don't know if her timeline is mirroring their timeline either. Like, both the group and her timelines are non-existent in this. The group, we have kind of an idea, a little bit more of what's happening. But I agree, or at least make it more of a thing where we see her getting into trouble on the way there. We see the struggles that she's going through, because Pike is going through her hero's journey.
Yep.
And if this was a book that came across my book for editing, I would close it a quarter of the way through, send it back, and say, fix it and send it back to me, because there is no hero's journey. She shows up on the doorstep. She says, there's something wrong with me. They say, that's not wrong with you. You can't be cut off from the Everlight. And then in this episode, like, actually, yeah, there's something wrong with you. And so she's trying to sort this out. And that's all it is. There's something wrong with me. Oh, we're going to try to help you. Oh, we're having trouble helping you. Okay, well, we're going to try again. We're going to do a ceremony. Didn't work, I guess. And there's no, like, we're not getting the trials and tribulations. We're not getting her into trouble along the way. She's not learning anything. Like, in all the episodes that she's come up, she's learned one thing, and that was happened today. That in this episode that she's learned something. So her journey has been completely truncated, completely, like, for lack of a better term, half-assed. And with all the other episodes being 29, 30, 31 minutes, I was really disheartened to see that this episode is only 24 minutes. That 6 minutes would have gone a long way for Pike.
Yeah, this one kind of blew my mind in that aspect as well, because I just feel like they could have done so much more justice for Pike instead of making it a shortened episode and not giving her a real story. I really don't like the fact that her entire hero's journey plot point for the past 6 episodes. I think she left she left at the end of the second episode. Her entire plot point has been something's wrong, I don't know what. Something's wrong, I don't know what. Something's wrong, I don't know what. For like 3 episodes, and now we're getting something, and it wasn't even satisfying. So
yeah, well, and that's the problem. And I can see that in my mind. I can kind of hear the argument in the writer's room when they're talking about this of, you know what, she was gone, she was disappeared, so we have to do something for it, but we can't give too much of the story to her because she wasn't there, so we have to focus on the main group for the story. But at that point, you either break the rules and you give her more of a story, or you disappear her and just have her gone for 5 episodes and then have her come back being like, and do a flashback of what happened. Because literally, so far, everything that has happened could have been done in a 3-minute flashback.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I agree. I honestly think that in this case, maybe less would have been better. Maybe if she just left and we didn't hear from her, and then she came back and gave us her story really quickly, I think that would have been enough, instead of trying to make it a thing but not giving her enough substance for it to be a thing.
Yeah, they're rather rapidly destroying her character, and if they have her come back and be the savior of everything in the end, I will flip a table. Because you can't have her disappear, give her that terrible of a storyline, degrade her character that far along, and then make her the savior in the end.
Yeah.
So that remains to be seen.
Yeah.
So hopefully there'll be no table flipping, because I've got a lot of expensive equipment on my table.
Yeah. Hopefully you clear that table before you flip it, if that's the case.
But then it does jump in immediately back to the scene with Professor Andres and Percy and Cass, with Cass bleeding out on the ground.
Right.
And Andres just, again, I'll give my impression. What was your impression of this scene starting out, and how they covered this section to start?
So my honest opinion, starting from the end of last episode, I liked the cliffhanger. I thought it was a really well done. Like, I know we had the argument of whether or not it was actually a kill blow, but that was a fine cliffhanger and the right thing to start up on in this episode. I'm a little disappointed that we didn't actually start up on it. I think this was the episode where skipping the cold open and going straight to the action may have made more sense, because she had her throat slit. That being said, I have a lot of issues with how this scene percolates. I felt really bad. I had that really gut, like, oh, they just killed Cassandra. This is really what happened. Like, she looked like a corpse.
Yeah.
And then they bring Keyleth over. Keyleth starts making a POTUS and is doing some stuff. And somehow, with mud and roots and spit, is able to bring a dead person back to life. Now, if you wanted to say that she used magic, cool. Magic potions, cool. She was using like roots and spit and mud.
Herbs. Yeah.
So I have some questions there, and I thought it kind of took away from that really, really powerful scene that we just saw at the end of the last episode with Cassandra bleeding out on the floor and Percy staring in mock horror. I also didn't like the fact that as that scene is progressing, Anders just stands there and watches and continues to like laugh. He doesn't run away. He doesn't. No one pays any attention to him. It was just so weak, which is a common occurrence I feel in this episode. Was everything that happened was just so weak. Nothing felt like it really wanted to be done or knew that was the direction they wanted to take it in.
Yeah, I concur with what you're saying. I had the same problems. I don't know if she was dead or if she was clinging to life or what it was, but she was right on death's doorstep and shaking hands if she wasn't dead. And it happened so fast. And then to have the professor standing there, pouring a drink, making snide remarks, all this stuff where they're at war. Vox Machina has been messing stuff up to this point. And he's on his hands and knees holding his sister, and you don't take the killing blow? You don't kill him, you're just sitting there making smart ass comments. Like, I can understand, as we learn later in the episode, why he's being cocky with this. Yeah. But that really kind of fell flat for me, whereas like, because that was my reaction. I'm like, why in the hell is he standing there? Like, he's just sitting there and then casually going like, there's the thing of like being a bold and brash antagonist and being in control of the situation and being cocky, and they missed the mark on that. That just became, hey Paradox, how are you? Welcome. That just became a guy hanging around for the show. Like, it's, he wasn't even trying to make sure, like, you can make the argument he wanted to see the suffering and he knew that he was powerful and they wouldn't be able to stop him and all this other stuff. But it's kind of, without the lead up, without even any hint of something that he had some kind of extra power, was problematic for that. And the other thing that I found too, like you said, everything seemed contrived. So from the healing, which then why do we need Pike if she can heal someone that badly damaged? And she wasn't healed. Like, if she was healed because she was stabbed with a pike or something and the handle was sticking out and Keyleth was able to pull the wood apart or something, then yes, I can understand and maybe use wood to weave things back together or something like that, or grass fibers or something. But to use what she did, and even I was disappointed in the way they handled the anxiety in this episode. They've handled mental health so well in all of this, and it was just a brief, like, it almost seemed pandering. It was like, oh, she's really anxious about all this stuff, but she's been getting more and more powerful. And then she kind of spits and she's looking at the mud. She's not saying anything. She's like in the action mode. She's acting, she's calling out orders, she's getting stuff ready, she's about to blade the poultice on. And then Vax is like, you can do this, you've got this. And it's like, that's pandering as hell and didn't fit in. And it just seemed like, oh yeah, we have to hit that mental health note on this one as well. But I do have to say though, I did, well, that comes up afterwards. But Vax grabs the stuff that's needed for the spell, and then as they're trying to save her, Anders attacks Percy finally, or he says something that pisses Percy off, and they go after
finally.
Him. And I like the fact that he's like, calls him a son of a bitch and says, we're all sons of bitches, especially you who came from that bitch mother, whatever, and goes off. But even that argument I found, because that's where I was like, oh, like because then they start running and there's this like, he's starting this monologue of things, and the monologue dies so quickly and doesn't really have a lot of substance.
Yeah, it makes me wonder how much substance the character was written as, whether it was just like, we're gonna add another person to be a foil to Percy, or whether like there was actually more motivation behind it. We do get to see the flashback where the children are in Professor Anders' class, and the dad kind of foo-foos the professor's idea, however it was, for the White Stone. So we get that in other episodes, but then there's no doubling down on the information that Professor Anders has or his motivation. He starts to get into it, pulls back, and then it turns into action.
Yeah.
Action for the sake of action.
Basically just says they didn't respect my intellect. And that was the other thing, too, is that they're going through a haul of obviously valuable artifacts, because I don't tend to put my daughter's dirty diaper in a glass case on a pedestal. And there is no recognition of that. Stuff's getting smashed, getting shattered, things are going through, and there's no one's like, even Percy being like, oh no, our family book is about to be... It's just things are getting smashed and torn apart and thrown around, and they may as well be in a break room.
It's funny that you mention that, because they even specifically say after the fight, check the house for anything that might be potentially valuable or magical, something like that. And they return and say, no, there's nothing here.
Yeah.
So what is in all these cases?
Yeah, exactly. Like, there's some pretty rare missteps in this one. But then, yeah, like I have down here, Percy chases the professor. While there's a bit of like, the professor gives a bit of a backstory, and then that backstory just dies really quick. Yep. And then he jumps into this action where it goes from this like really random thing to, I've got these iron giants and a silver tongue that can control these iron giants. Which, again, I've got issue with this as well, because he, as jumping ahead of it for a moment, he possesses Grog and everybody else and takes over their mind and controls them and all that stuff. And then when they're fighting these iron giants and they're trying to take them down, it turns out they have to cut the straps. They cut the straps off, everything falls apart. So there's no human, or there's no being inside of these. They're lifeless, hollow bits of iron or steel. How are they being possessed if it's just an armor case?
So I personally liked the idea of Professor Anders having a silver tongue, and
that was
thus
great.
being able to... I thought that was a great power and thing that they did. And the Iron Giants, like, honestly, why even use the Iron Giants? You have this awesome power to control people and make them fight for you, and there's a giant dumb guy in front of you. It just, we actually didn't need that part. That was more time they could have devoted to Pike.
Yeah. I mean, I understand the thing of the trials and tribulations and putting the group at risk and facing odds that are insurmountable and putting them into the darkest night of the episode, where it's like, are they going to... Well, that was not the darkest night. The darkest night was when Grog was possessed, but the, like, how are they going to get through this? How are they going to survive this? But, and again, it seems like every time that they're in this kind of situation, it's just a slick, and it's gone. Like,
yeah, and I think the craziest thing about what you're saying is, don't you feel like they were in more danger when the party was starting to face off than at any point against the Iron Giants?
Oh yeah.
So they could have had that fight be longer and more intense and have more injuries that apparently Keyleth could have healed. They could have really, instead of that, the face-off part being as short as it was, because compared to the Iron Giant fight, it didn't get enough time, and it was the coolest idea.
Yeah, it was the greatest part. Like, I mean, the Iron Giants were great, but if you, on the surface level, they were awesome. But if you break it down, what was he possessing? There is nothing inside to move those. His ability is to possess a human, or is to possess a mind, to make someone do what they want. If there's no being inside of those suits, there's nothing to move them. There's nothing to control them. There's no mind to be controlled. And the suits, when they were hit, they fell apart. There was nothing inside of them. Right? It wasn't like there were giants that were dead sitting inside, unless that's something that we just didn't get to see. That's hidden in there. But that brings up another point of continuity. They've been so good at nailing their continuity to this point, and then we have Grog going in and getting riddled with arrows. And then this fight scene, he doesn't have any blood on him. He doesn't have any arrow holes. And at the end of all of this, when they're walking away, he's fine, and they don't have a healer.
Not not only is he fine, but he even boasts about how he was riddled with arrows.
Yeah, and there's like nothing that's there. So that's a massive continuity thing that they did. Like, I understand it can be problematic to like remember where all the arrow holes were and stuff and all this, but you got to do something with it, you know.
I kind of took that as just, you know, anime, like sometimes the wounds don't continue. The wounds like that. If you have a big bruise or you know, a missing limb or something, that'll continue, but bullet holes and arrow holes don't continue for some reason.
But they've set the marker for this already of continuing those things. Right?
I know.
Even the blood coming down from Archie's neck, from his cut ear, was continued on for episodes.
Well, I think my best argument now is me and you and the viewers are aware that they have the best healer, probably in the world, in their party right now, who can heal people from the brink of death with spit. So
yeah, and that's so. Like I said, there are some. We're not trying to crap on the episode. It's just there's some issues that have arisen with it. But yeah, that silver tongue thing was a really cool. And I love the fact that it actually was a silver tongue. Like, you know, being able to... Because that's... If someone's got a silver tongue, they can talk anyone into doing anything, right?
Yep.
But then I do like the fact that when Percy is facing off, there's... against the Iron Giants, and he shoots down the chandelier. And then this moment where it comes crashing down, it's like, well, that didn't work. Like, no effect at all. Like, not to say that the entire fight against the Giants was... terrible and bad and stupid. It had its moments. There's some really funny and cool parts to it. And then when Vax comes in and Percy's like, no, this revenge is mine, and Vax basically says, shut up. We're all in this together.
Yeah, I definitely don't want to come across as saying that the fight itself against the Giants was bad, for my opinion, because it wasn't. It was a fine action sequence. It's just that the face-off with Professor Anders is so much better.
Yeah.
Or could have been so much better, and his ability with his silver tongue was just such a cool idea and such a fun thing to have in there, that even though the Iron Giant fight was quippy and had a lot of really neat assets to it, it wasn't needed as much as an Anders fight needed to be longer.
It did. And beyond the fact that there really wasn't an Anders fight. Again, he just stood in the corner laughing and watching and making snide remarks. Like, I mean, he's not fit. He's not going to go start swinging around a broadsword, because I think the biggest thing he can swing around is the leg of mutton. But
well, I don't know his tongue.
Yeah. But there was, again, like, it's just this entire episode, the only thing Anders did was stand around, make smart ass comments.
Yeah. Well... yeah.
Like, he used his ability and he activated a few people, but he just didn't do much of anything. It was just kind of anticlimactic.
I was gonna say he also died.
Yeah, he died, and that was actually a really cool scene. We're gonna get to that. That scene I really liked, and they actually did there were some really awesome writing tricks that they did in this. For as many mistakes that they made, or missteps in my opinion that they made, there's some really cool stuff that they did as well. But then we pauses and we go to Grog and Vex, and Grog is in his murder rage, smashing heads together, and Vex is, again, there's the slightly bring in her sexuality into this with someone hitting on her, and but I've got like here fighting arrow through the head ! That was a cool shot. That shows her skill and her precision. Like, she just jumped up and was able to hit it, and it was fantastic for that. But yeah, and then that too was, there was so much of the last episode of them coming in. There's all these soldiers and Grog running in and getting riddled, and it's a trap, and then that whole climax fell down. Yep. She shot a couple of arrows, Grog smashed a couple of heads together, she shot an arrow through an arrow, hit someone through the head with something cool, and cut. And that fight scene didn't get the time it deserved either.
Yeah. It's just unfortunate, because I think the quippiness and comedy aspect of the fight scenes works the best when they have the hordes of enemies. And when they came in through the door and were surprised and there were just a bunch of people shooting at Grog, I think that was a good example of what could have been a really fun horde attack scene. That was the type of thing where in earlier episodes in the prison when they were breaking out Archie, they made a lot of fun choices and things worked. And by skipping over that and having more time devoted to Iron Giants, it just in my opinion wasn't as strong of a fight, even though it was still enjoyable. Story wise, it wasn't as strong of a fight.
Yeah, I agree with that. But then they do have that quip again when there's hordes of enemies. Vex and Grog come in, and there's all these Iron Giants running around, and Grog's like, "Who can I kill?" I'm like, anyone. Just jump in and start murdering. This is where you go murder Ovo. Just have fun and kill. Which he can't. But then again,
and again, that's their strength. That's their strength, is those quippy lines.
Exactly, and then it's just another quick cut, and we have. I do like this where we have Keyleth healing Cass. We finally see that thing happening. And then, so my notes, because I was making notes as I was watching this episode. So it's like, Keyleth heals Cass. Nope. Yay! Because
Yeah.
it works. Like but even that moment of like, oh, she's dead. It was, I don't know what it was. It just seemed like a lot of stuff fell flat. A lot of the suspense, a lot of the tension, a lot of the things was just kind of like, okay. And then it was either clipped, like that scene I felt was too truncated. Like there was just like, oh, I healed her. Wait, no, she's dead. Oh no, I didn't. Oh, okay, yeah, she's alive.
Yeah, this was one of the things that I couldn't figure out how to put into words how I felt about it, because in the same way, it felt like either not enough time was devoted to the fact that she was alive, or too much time was put into the fact that she survived, and I just couldn't figure out how I wanted it to work. Yeah. I thought the fact that Keyleth worked magic and resurrected her or saved her is fine, and when she died, I was like, okay, like this is a very like serious moment. But then it wasn't serious because she like popped back to life, and I don't know if that's what it was that took me out of it, that made it not feel real anymore.
But then there's also that
I don't
like
know.
pass out thing afterwards, where she pops back up. Like for everything that she's been through, to pass out, I was kind of like, well, why? She's been living with her Briarwoods for the past like 10 years. Why in the hell would that make her like seeing someone else being like, and then passing out? Like that's the shock that's going to get you? Not seeing your brother that you thought was dead for 10 years?
And out of all the people that were in the building at that time, I think Keyleth is the one that least would make me pass out if I woke up to her.
Yeah. So now in this scene, there's that thing that happens, and then Keyleth runs off, and she transforms into the saber-toothed tiger, which I love. It's a badass character that she transforms into. I think it would have been better, in my mind, to have the scene where she's like, oh, I've saved her, and no, I guess I didn't. And then she hears smashing and banging, she looks over, and she sees, and she transforms and tears off into the fight. And then at the end of the fight, when they're all kind of catching their breath, they hear like a bit of a coughing or something and a sputtering, and they look over and they see Cassandra sit up.
Yeah, I agree, and that's exactly what I meant by like maybe too much or too little. Like I think if they had peeled off of it and given it time to breathe, no pun intended, but given it time to breathe that she survived, then that would have helped. Or if they just didn't make it as doughy when she was revived, then that also would have helped. One or the other, just not quite what it was.
Yeah. And for me, the thing that took me out of it was the pass out. I was like, I can understand. I mean, I don't know where she was when she was unconscious. So maybe waking up and seeing someone sitting in front of her, because the last thing she saw was her brother and Anders, and now she's sitting up with some strange person. You can see a little bit of a shock being there. But the whole pass out thing and that was just, it was a little bit too Warner Brothers for me.
Yeah.
But then, so Keyleth does come in with the saber-tooth tiger. She starts trying to kick ass, and they're all
Very
outmatched.
Cool. Very cool.
They're all getting devastated. Like, there's
Yep.
nothing that they can do. And then they realize quickly to cut the straps because Percy shoots through the straps, and the arms fall down. And then and again, that was the other thing too, is that something it didn't bother me before in the writing of the show, and now it's starting to kind of irk me a little bit, in the sense that as soon as they find the winning key, or the key to their success, the tide of the battle changes, everything is good, and they win. So it's like, oh, we have to cut the straps. Okay, everyone, straps are cut, we've done, it's over, we've won. And it just seems to, like, they're still being outmatched. They're still facing off against these giant, like, they did it a little bit with Grog, and then Vax coming in, and Grog getting pissed off at him. But it just seemed just too quick, like, oh, we found our level of success, let's just, within a minute, all the other giants are dead, and no one's gotten hurt, and we're okay. And that was the other thing too, is that no one got hurt in this.
Yes, and it kind of leads me along the same path that I mentioned in previous episodes. They don't really have a healer, so they can't get too hurt, or.
But that adds tension and suspense to the story. Right?
No,
if you've got Scanlan trying to fight, and he's got like a torn hamstring and like wound through his side, and he's barely moving, that adds tension and suspense. For the fact that with all these episodes since Pike has gone, that they've gone through all of this crazy stuff and faced off against all of these wild creatures, and apart from Grog being riddled with arrows, no one's really been hurt.
I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just pointing out that, as far as we can tell, there's no way for them to heal.
Yeah. But from a writing perspective, that's how you add suspense and tension. That's how you make things worse. And I was trying to explain this to someone a little while ago, that if your heroes are constantly coming out on top and they're reaching the level of God, then people stop having suspense. Because if every situation they get into, they come out on top, and they come out relatively unscathed, then I'm not going to be, like, the next battle they get into, I'm not going to be concerned about Vox Machina at all. Because they're going to walk out of it fine compared to everything else. Now, it might be a bit of a shock if one of them gets killed or seriously hurt or loses a limb or something like that. But to this end, it's like, well, all right, now I'm just watching the battle scenes to see the cool things that they do and the cool way they work their way out of it. It's kind of like Shaggy and the Mystery Machine and the rest of the group, where it's like, they're going to survive, they're going to pull the hood off and find out who the real bad guy is in the end. And there's going to be some tension as they get to that point, but no real harm is going to come.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's too bad, because it showed a lot of promise at the beginning. At the beginning, like, we saw Grog take a pretty nasty hit and just start spewing blood, and then he needed to be healed. And, like, they had good precedent at the beginning of the series, and it just hasn't carried through.
Yeah, and that's what we've discussed, is from a writing perspective, when you're introducing a story, be it a visual story or a book or whatever it is that you're doing, like whatever medium it is, you're starting off by giving a day in the life as an example of what their ordinary world is like. You're giving an exciting incident, and you're making a promise that if you come with me, this is the ride you're going to be on, and that promise is going to pay off. And now that we're 8 episodes in, there's a couple of points where the promises they made in episodes 1 and 2 aren't having that payoff. They're not following through with what they promised to the viewer at the beginning. But I do like Grog's I hate your face. But then again, immediately Grog is taken over. Yep. And
I think it's funny that we're now 8 episodes in, and there's a lot of things that I've had an up and down feeling with, but the actual dialogue is definitely not one of it.
Oh yeah,
I've enjoyed all the one-liners. I've enjoyed all the quips, and I especially think Grog hasn't had a bad line. Even his throwaway background lines have just been solid gold.
Yeah, Grog is quickly building up to be one of my favorite characters. He's just a fantastic guy. But again, even with this, like, Grog is being possessed or controlled, and they're all just standing around to the point that Vax gets picked up by the head and is standing there or floating there in Grog's hand. And I was like, you know what this guy can do. Would you not kind of step back when you see what's about to happen? I mean, there's battle fatigue. There's all these things that can factor into it. That's another thing. They never have any battle fatigue. They never make missteps because they're tired or anything like that. Like, again, it's the characters are becoming godlike characters. And I understand it's a game and you want to keep it's based off a game and you want to keep the characters alive and things are done a certain way, but I think they need to be ramping up the tension more. Which they kind of do at the end. I'm really hoping this next battle in the next episode pays off. There's so much. Like, I would love to see someone die. Or lose a limb.
Oh, yeah.
Or something like that. Because at this point, they're just... Even if it's not one of the main characters, even if it's like Archie or someone else, like a peripheral character, someone needs to die. Someone needs to get seriously hurt. Because like we talked about in the last episode, Archie was crushed through a stone wall. And castle walls are generally at least 8 feet thick. And he was crushed through a stone wall. And was running around like bouncing kittens on his knee like 10 minutes later. It doesn't line up that way. Again, with no healer.
So far, there's been at least 3 people that I can think of that should, in all pretenses, be dead at this point, and they haven't followed through with it. So I agree with you. I'm hoping that, and it sounds super pessimistic, I'm hoping that someone dies.
Yeah.
But I would need to have the feeling that the Grim Reaper is still there.
Well, and that's where it comes down to a balance. George R.R. Martin killed everything that moved for the sake of killing people and having shock. And it got to the point where, myself personally, I stopped caring about characters. Because anytime a character became prevalent and the story focused on them, by the end of the episode, they were dead. Yep. And you can kill too many, but you can also kill too few, where you get into the god range, which is problematic. But then we jump back to Pike. And Pike is meditating. She's back in this meditation zone. That creature that she was rushed by, I really loved. And I'm assuming that's the dead one or the whatever that thing from the book was called.
The Whispered One.
The Whispered One. I'm assuming that is the Whispered One. Because it came from Delilah's magic, and this is all tied into the whole thing. And it kind of seemed like a Whispered One. If I caught it really quick, but it looked like it was a 3-eyed skull floating in robes that was coming after them. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, the image of the Whispered One was a skull with 3 eyes in the book.
Interesting.
I don't remember if the skull had 3 eyes or not, but I remember there was a skull attached to this whole thing.
Yeah.
I love the fact that if I'm getting near or far to something, you're just like, oh yeah, interesting. That's a point. But then she gets grabbed and she gets pulled under into the mire. And again, even that was she gets grabbed, pulled into the mire, and they don't cut away from it. It's like, oh no, she's gone. Oh, she's back. Okay. And it's just so quick.
Yeah.
So the Everlight pulls her out, and then they have, again, that for building up to this whole thing was just such a quick, like, I'm going to go back in by myself. I'm here by myself. Oh no, I'm being attacked. I'm being pulled under. Oh, there's the Everlight. And pop back up. Oh, the problem is with me the entire time. Oh, okay. And then problem getting solved kind of thing.
Yeah. I thought the whole vision, meditation quest, whatever, however you want to define it, I thought the creature was really cool. I thought the tenseness of it was very cool. And I agree that the time that was devoted to it, though, was the major problem, because we finally get to see her interact with this world and have something significant happen, which is whatever it is that happens with the Shadow Beast and then the Everlight. And it's just afforded so little time and so little explanation. And I also don't like the idea that they went with. She goes and seeks out people, they can't help her, so she has to deal with it herself. Like, I feel like it would have made more sense for her to try to figure it out on herself and then find people that can help her. And then all together, they're able to help her get through it. But it was a direction that they went with. I just wish more time was focused on the interaction. Like, I wish the shadow creature chased her more, or there was more interaction before she was pulled into the mire.
Yeah.
And then I wish there was more, I guess, definition from the Everlight, more information about what it is she represents. You get the idea from her conversation with Pike that she is light and perhaps she represents the value of truth, just by the whole discussion of, you need to be true to yourself, not just true to me. But I just wish that it was more defined. I wish that maybe Pike did studying or had a discussion with the priests or priestesses and had that discussion where you get to find out more about what the Everlight is.
Yeah,
before seeing it.
That's a really big part. That's a really big thing. And again, this comes back to where I can almost see an argument happening in the writer's room where they say she's gone, let's not involve her, and say, well, no, we have to involve her. Well, she's not really a part of the story. Well, okay, well, we'll just write her in a little bit. And they just hit that awkward middle where it's just not enough information, not enough backstory, not enough explanation of what is happening with her. Because again, that whole, like you said, that's a really good point. The whole thing is focused on Pike, not what order does she belong to? What do they do? Apart from being paladins or clerics or whatever she is, what do they do?
Yeah.
And where, what are their ministries? How far out are they spread around the world? Like, that's another thing too, is we don't even know how big the world is. We have no concept of the size of the world or the spaces between. Like we've already addressed, we don't know how long it took her to get there. We don't know how long it took them to get to the Whitestone. The group to get to Whitestone. So it's kind of, there's the kind of a lack of boundaries set with stuff. But she's being told, she said, I've failed, I've lost my way. And then the Everlight says, lies will not bring you back, and blasts her with light. And then we cut. And again, that is, I think the cutscenes are timed at the wrong spot. Had she been pulled under the darkness and then cut, fantastic.
Perfect.
Come back, let us linger with it. Hell, leave it to next episode. But at the very least, let us linger with it a little bit. And then come back and add more suspense. Because they just kept walking up. This episode is a door for the writers. They kept walking up to the door and couldn't figure out how to knock on it. Couldn't figure out how to open it. That's it. They couldn't figure out how to open it. So they kept walking up to the door of suspense and then couldn't get past it. And there's so many things that they could have done, such great suspenseful moments with this episode. And they've just, right when you're about to reach and get that hitch in someone's chest, they throw it away and they give the answer and they walk on to the next. It really did seem like a filler checklist episode that they're just trying to continue the story to get to something more exciting. And that's the danger of, in writing, that's what we call the saggy middle bit. In episode 6, I said they did a fantastic job of avoiding the saggy middle bit. 7 and 8 showed me to be wrong in that, because this saggy middle bit is really coming back to bite them.
Yeah, I couldn't have described that better. That's exactly how I felt throughout the episode in general, was missing the beats by just another beat.
Yeah.
They were so close. I just missed it a little bit.
Yeah. But then we do go back to Andres, or Professor Andres, and the thing I do like about this episode that was the suspense was they made him this doughy, bullish, cocky character with an amazing power that I did spend a good chunk of this being like, how in the hell are they going to stop him? I wasn't afraid that they were going to die. My thing was, how are they going to stop him and prevent him from going back to Delilah or something else or whatever it is? Because he just seemed like such a strong character. But Grog is now picked up or is possessed and is going and kicking ass and just devastating the entire group.
Mm-hmm.
Which was a very exciting scene. Vax stabs Grog.
Yeah.
Doesn't really do much of anything. I don't know why. That's another thing too. I was like, dude, you've got a dagger that's like 6 inches long. You've seen what Grog goes through and walks away with going, is this normal? And you stab him in the shoulder thinking you're going to stop him?
I think Vax and Grog's relationship just made it really tough for Vax to really go mano a mano against him. And that's why you end up with a dagger to the shoulder, because it doesn't actually want to hurt him.
Yeah.
It just wants to knock him back into reality.
Or maybe thought the shock of it would snap him out of it.
Yeah.
Because that's kind of
what
what happened with Vax. He got possessed by Silas, and then it was kind of snapped back to reality and jumps out the window. So maybe that's what he thought this, like when he was bit, that pain, that shock kind of brought him back to reality, and maybe that's what he was hoping with this.
Different power.
Yeah, different power, different everything. And then Andres possesses everybody else. Vex, Vax, Keyleth, and Grog is already possessed.
Yeah, this is where I actually got concerned, because as you said, I was like, how exactly are you going to stop this now without hurting your friends or dying?
Yeah. And again, right to the door of suspense, and then walked away before knocking. Right? Because they've got this. Yep. That would have been a really awesome scene, like a Civil War scene where they're fighting against each other. And how do you trip that balance? It would have been for Percy, because he's trying to stop his friends without killing them and still get his revenge and all the stuff that's happening. That could have been such a really well choreographed, really awesome fight scene. Instead, a couple of arrows with shot. He's pinned to the wall by Key, and then it just goes back to him focusing on Professor Andres again.
Yep.
And there was just such a missed opportunity with that fight scene.
Yeah. Yeah, like I said, if they had just put some of the resources, some of the extra time, if they didn't want to give the Pike to that scene, they could have really done something really cool.
Yeah. Because they have amazing characters. They've got amazing writing. They've got amazing... All the characters have fantastic abilities, and it's just so exciting. But and speaking of those fantastic abilities, we do have where Percy suddenly apologizes and starts messing with the professor's mind, and that's just long enough for him to pull in his dark power. And this is the first time that we actually see him fully activate the dark power without putting on the mask.
Mm-hmm.
Which was something I didn't know that he was able to do. And then that scene with the, like, it's a trope. The ricocheting bullet is definitely a trope, but it was still kind of cool the way they did it and what they had to bounce off of, like using his own enemies against, or his own like warriors against him, because Percy has seen that they're impenetrable. The bullet's not going to go in and go through the armor. It's just going to bounce off, like the claws of the saber-tooth tiger, their swords, their arrows, everything. So he knows it's going to ricochet. And he's good with the pepper box. So that was kind of a cool shot.
Yeah, I thought it was really a very spectacular ending to that, especially when you've got the back against the wall scenario. My only question or concern, I guess, with it was we've never actually seen the pepper box shoot out a bullet. Kind of in the other scenes, there's a big explosion, and up to this, I'd always assumed that it was using just like black powder and shrapnel or something, because of the way that he loads it. He kind of has the box thing that he shoves into the barrel, and then he pumps it a couple times.
Yeah.
So I was surprised when, he shoots out this lone bullet and it does all these ricochets and then hits Anders. And I don't know if it was just me missing something previously, but I was just shocked to see a bullet.
Yeah, no, I think you've hit the mark on that, because that's from my recollection, there hasn't been an actual projectile that we've seen coming out of it. But that's the thing. It shoots perfect blast. But then again, the other thing too is, I mean, if we want to get really technical and really finicky about it, it ricochets off several objects. Each time it ricochets, it changes direction, it loses velocity, it loses power. And for it to go, and it wasn't charged up with the special abilities, it was just a fired shot. And it to blow off his jaw and his tongue, all that stuff was like, it was, if you want to get technical, the amount of ricochets involved, the amount of damage that was done, was a little off kilter, but that's just really getting into the semantics of it. But I thought it was
still
great.
really cool.
Yeah, shooting the tongue out was fantastic, because I saw that and I was like, that's how they're gonna get him. All right, that's kind of cool. And the fact that the tug then like crawls away like a slug.
Yeah, didn't expect that.
Yeah, so it made me think of the so the whole time I saw the tongue, I was like, how is this working? What's the magic behind it? What's the power behind it? And there's a parasite in the oceans that will go into a fish's mouth and eat the fish's tongue and replace the fish's tongue, and any food that it pulls in, the parasite eats, and the fish eventually starves to death. And so I was kind of like, oh, maybe it's like a parasitic growth, like this thing. And when it was inching away, I'm like, that's kind of along the line of maybe that's what it is, this fish parasite thing. That was kind of cool. But this is something they did really well, I found, is there is a lot of darkness, there's a lot of tension. Leading up to this point, Percy against the wall, there actually was this moment of like, okay, what is Percy, not is Percy going to die, but how is he going to get out of this? What is he going to do? And the fact that he apologizes, and there's this back and forth and this thing, and then you see the tongue crawling away, was really built up tension, and then you see Percy with smoke billowing, walking forward. There's this stress and anxiety built around this whole thing. And I talk to people often in writing coaching about the fact that if you have too much stress and tension for too long, you lose the reader, you lose the characters. You have to break it up once in a while. And instead of this, because this was a prolonged battle scene, whether or not it was well done, whether or not they missed beats, whatever was happening, it was a long battle scene in the middle of this show. And it gets to the point where the reader or the viewer can fall into battle fatigue. So instead of actually having a drop off and cutting away again, which would have completely killed the magic in this moment, they have this comedic relief in the background where you see Percy storming towards him, and then you see everyone else running around like monkeys trying to catch this tongue that's crawling around and reacting to this tongue. So you've got this comedic pause, this comedic beat in the middle of the tension that's still happening that really kind of deflates a little bit and brings everything back down a little bit before it ramps right back up. And I found they did that really well in this scene.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. It was pretty awesome. And then that animation. The pepper box to Andrew's mouth with the jaw missing. And like not up, like you actually see it. That was beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, that was as good of a killing blow as I've seen in this show so far.
Yeah.
But it led me back to that. Where did the bullet come from in the last scene? Because he just explodes that guy's face.
But that shot was charged. He had all of his powers, and that shot was fully charged when he fired off. So I was like, okay, I can let that one go a little bit. But yeah, you're right though. That bullet is kind of a standalone thing. And this does come back to the point that they do such a good job with the show, typically on all of this stuff, that when they do have missteps, it glares. And unfortunately, it's just they use these, at most, episode 7 should have been a building, because we often see that in writing, in books, in stories, and series and stuff like that. The first episode sets the scene, we hit a break, especially now that a lot of TV shows are doing mid-season breaks. And then the next episode back is kind of like a re-promise. This is what happened, this is where we're going, and we go through. But now this next episode is the same thing. It's another re-promising episode where they're setting stuff up, and it's just, there could have been more depth to it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and then we have the Percy and Cassandra reunion that I found was like, I thought you were dead. I thought you would come back and check on me. And he didn't even react to that. It wasn't even like, I should have. It was just like, I thought you were coming back for me. It's like, wow, well, yeah. And then the conversation continues. Like for how much they built this up, and again, the fact that Percy was willing to sacrifice the entire village to save his sister. The fact that she was saved wasn't that beat wasn't hit hard enough, and then their reunion was just for both of them was just like meh. Like you missed your bus and you finally got here. Okay.
Oh yeah, and you're the reason why.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I thought that the reunion was kind of a downbeat, but I also liked it. I liked the punchiness of Cassandra. I liked the fact that she didn't pull the punch and said, "I thought you were coming back." Like I really liked her character. I think that's what it is. I liked her character. I didn't like how Percy responded or interacted.
Yeah.
And again, it was one of those things where I feel like that discussion could have benefited from another 30 seconds or another minute of them like being happy to see each other or recognizing each other for more than "I thought you were coming back."
Well, and that's the thing is because when you're making the promise, you're making the promise of a big payoff at the end. That was the payoff of this episode. Was whether or not Cassandra survived and them reuniting. And the promise wasn't kept. The promise was broken on that. I do like the fact that they did go into it a little bit, but I'll let you finish your thought and then I'll jump in on that.
So even though I'm being critical at this moment, I enjoyed it. I did enjoy the payoff that I got. I wish that there was more, but I liked the fact that Cassandra had personality and we got to see it right away.
Yeah. She definitely had a spark. She definitely had fire. I like that. I like the fact that she wasn't afraid to, like, she wasn't going to back down when he's like, like, you should have run or whatever he says. And her response was, well, running's never been my strong point. But again, like, it's this whole thing of like, wow, they've had you for 10 years. You've been living with the Briarwoods the whole time. She's like, yeah, they paraded me around as a showpiece and because they were using me. And then I was using them because I was telling the rebellion or the resistance the information. And then it's done.
Nothing.
Like there's just how did they use her as a showpiece? How did that work? How did they try because they originally said at the dinner party that the Derulos were cast out and thrown out and the children stole all their wealth and that's why they had to take over and control everything. Well, if the children stole all the wealth and that's the story they told everybody in Whitestone and they had to take over to save the day, then how are they parading and why are they parading Cassandra around as a showpiece for the people if she's the one that supposedly stole all their wealth?
Well, and obviously the people know she's there because they mention it often that Cassandra's there in the castle. That was Archie's whole plot point to get Percy into what he did was your sister's alive. So Whitestone knows. Like there's no getting around that. My assumption is that the story that the Briarwood spun is specifically for outside of Whitestone because, as we learned, no one that is coming in is getting out.
Yeah.
So
they've got different stories depending on who they're talking to at any different time. That makes sense. That does make sense. But they definitely could have given, like, I just want more on this.
Oh, absolutely.
But again, they could have. A part of me is like, but they only have a certain amount of time to tell the story and they go through. But they clipped time. I honestly think that they would have been better off doing 45-minute episodes. 12 45-minute episodes would have done so much more justice to the story, and they wouldn't have had to cut corners where they had to cut corners in getting things moving forward.
Yeah, I completely agree, and also agree. I said it at the beginning of our show today that it hurt me to hear Cassandra say, like, this big reveal, I'm the Kestrel, I've been giving information to the people, and then get no payback from it. Have no one react, no one cared. She just kind of spit out this truth bomb into the ether, and no one batted an eye. Like, I wanted more for her for that. And as you said about the run times, I don't know if that has something to do with the studio or their art style, if that's a reason why we have the shorter run times. But I agree. There are other animations that run 45-minute shows, and they get more story out of those episodes. And I don't think it would have. There's plenty of content that they could have put into 45-minute episodes.
Yeah.
So it's not like it would have been padding them. It would have been giving us more.
That's it. And the other thing that we have to take into account too is how it's being released. If it's a television show, you have to stick to the 30 or the 25-minute or the 50-minute format with commercial breaks and all that stuff factored into it. And you've got that time slot that you're in. This is a streaming service. They could have decided to go, because I think an hour would have been too long for each episode, but they could have easily gone between 30 minutes and 45 minutes for each episode, landing somewhere in the middle for those, whatever was organic. I don't think, and they've done the 28 minutes, 29 minutes, 25 minutes. They fall in between 25 and 30 minutes. So I don't think, because it's a streaming service, that you have to be held within a certain box of you have to be under 30 minutes for this to work, because that's the time slot that we have. They could have gone 35 minutes for some, 40 minutes for others. An episode like this, like a 45-minute episode, because so much was left unsaid with Professor and that whole scene. And even just the whole thing with Professor Andres. Like, he seems kind of a contrived character, because there was a really brief flashback that they showed with him, and then a really brief battle. Like, the Duke had more depth than Professor Andrews did. And Professor Andrews is the one that's holding the Kestrel.
Yep. Yeah, no, I agree.
So, but then they find there's nothing of value again. Like, maybe because everything was destroyed. Maybe that's why there's nothing of value. There's nothing of value in the house, except for the Star Scroll, which is, again, setting the seeds for the next thing. And then we have Grog's comment of, is that I connect the dot thingy. But the other thing with this, too, though, is that I found was a little bit lacking is the last episode made a lot of promises. They made a lot of things like, this is what's going to be happening. This is what's going to come. And most of those, if not all of them, boxes were ticked off in this episode rather quickly, like you said, in the checklist. And there wasn't a lot prepped or a lot of groundwork laid for the coming episodes. There was like 3 things. There's a star chart, there was the undead, and there was the Kestrel being released. And then the Lady Briarwood seeing what's happening. But there wasn't a lot of like, ooh, this is what's going to come. The biggest thing is like, are they going to survive the undead, and what the hell's being planned 5 days from now?
Yeah, no, I agree. And it kind of makes you feel like maybe the next episode again is going to be another bridge episode, because we're going to need something to get us to hopefully a battle with the Briarwoods, or at least some kind of ending to the season. So do we think that a star chart, undead, and the Kestrel being released, is that going to be it? Are those our breadcrumbs for the rest of the season? I don't think so. I think realistically, we're going to need at least another half episode of planning again.
Yeah. Of getting something set up. I went from being really excited for every episode to being excited mixed with a bit of nervousness for each episode.
Exactly.
Not to say that I think that they've destroyed the series or that it's all gone to hell, but it's just,
nope.
I've just have some more concerns on some of these things.
And I would, sorry.
No, go ahead.
And I would add that I have really thoroughly enjoyed the season. It's more when I sit down and rewatch it and think of it critically that I start to come up with the things that I nitpick. Just sitting down and watching it once, I had a good time. It was a good ride. Yeah. So I don't want people to feel discouraged if they watched it, enjoyed it, or anything like that, because I did the same thing. I'm just looking at it critically, obviously, as you are.
Yeah, and that's actually a really good point and a really good spot to pause here really quickly, for the fact that, again, for those of you that are joining us and may not know what the after the series is all about, is I look at things from a writer's perspective, Billy looks at things from a writer's actor's perspective, and we are actually breaking down, not just, oh, this is a really cool episode and this is what we liked about it. We're breaking down the good, the bad, and the ugly. We're breaking down the character arcs, the storylines, the timelines, how everything is laid out, the voice acting, if it's not an animation, the acting, and all these different things. So we're breaking it all down. And generally to this point, everything has been glowing praise, to the point that I was like, are people actually going to think that we're being paid by Critical Role to build up this show? And we're not. We're just honest. And we're not trying to crap on anything. We're not trying to dissuade anyone from watching. It is a fantastic show to watch. You will definitely enjoy it. And these little tidbits and things that we're going into, the only reason that we're able to go into them is because we have the background and the perspective to look into it and be able to pull this stuff apart. So Billy's an actor, and I run a literary company. I'm a writer. This is what I do, is edit and tear things apart and look at storylines and stuff. So we're being far more critical than any normal person would ever be when they're looking at something like that. Speaking of being critical, let's pause really quickly for the D&D dad joke of the night.
Oh, jeez.
Why did the fighter bring his sword to the ball? Because the invitation said it was a +1.
All right.
Like I said, they're bad, but they're actually good jokes. Anyways, so they've broken away. They've got the star chart, and Keyleth sends a signal into the air, which, again, I was not critical of the show, critical of Keyleth, the way Vex was, where I'm like, why didn't you just shoot a flare or like a fireball into the sky? Be like, yo, here we are. Like, that was a massive thing. Like, yeah, you're letting the village know that the rebellion is still alive and well by casting the Derulo's crest in the sky with the moon involved. But, dude, seriously.
I get it. I also loved it. I thought it was really cool. I thought it was a nice touch, bringing the crest back into it. But yeah, I mean, let's tell everyone what's going on.
And then, shock of all shocks, Delilah sees what happened.
Yeah.
And is more than a little bit pissed about it. But at least they recognize it. That's one of those things, and that's what I talk about a lot when I'm coaching with writing, is you can break the rules. But there's certain rules that if you break them and you're doing something really stoneheaded, you need to call it out. If you're info dumping, and you need to call out the fact that you're info dumping, right? If you are putting a brilliant broadcast signal into the sky telling you where you are and that you're successful and everything that's happening, you need to address it. So the fact that Vex actually is like, well, maybe we shouldn't have gone so big with our signal, was like, that was perfect. That addressed it perfectly. You did something that was really cool, really awesome, really stupid, and you recognize that it was stupid.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that Delilah's response to it made perfect sense. She was not pleased to be seeing the Derolo crest in the sky.
Yeah. It completely makes sense. And again, it shows, like, after this episode, I really don't want to see a lot of heavy leaning on Keyleth's anxiety anymore, because she has grown as a character so far. A little bit of slips, a little bit of backsteps, yes, but to have her in the middle of a battle scene again and being like, oh, I'm so anxious, I don't know what to do, will fall flat, because she has grown enough, and she has grown enough in her confidence, and the group is supporting her enough that over the past couple of episodes she has stepped in and done what needed to be done, and then did some really big things like change the clouds into the Derolo crest. That shows that she's coming into her own and believing in herself. So a few backslides I can understand, but to go back into the quivering beneath the table, I don't know what to do, would be a massive mistake.
Yeah, I agree. And not only has she kind of stepped up into her own, but the Derolo crest, like stepping up and making that signal, that was all her. She said, oh, I've got an idea, and did it. So it again brings me back to not knowing what the timeline is, because at some points I look at this and be like, this character development happened too fast. But it also might not have. So that kind of gives me a big question mark on where we're going to go going forward with Keyleth, whether we are going to see those slip ups, or whether enough time has passed and enough confidence has been built that she's okay now, better now.
What they need to do with that is a recognition moment where they show that all of this growth has been done on adrenaline and just like guts and just going, not thinking and just going through. And then at the end, when everything settles, to have this moment of her being like, holy shit, what did I just do?
I did
Like, how did I just get, like, I just went through all of this stuff, and wow. Like, that's pretty amazing. Like, this moment of recognition, this moment of, like, clarity for her is definitely needed at this point. Because it is a quick point, a quick character arc. My thinking for it, again, is that it's entirely adrenaline-driven. And she has been getting some positive feedback from people. But again, it was just the last episode, the Scanbo episode, literally the last episode, where Vex yelled at her for lighting the sun tree on fire, and she cowered down into a ball.
Yep. And didn't continue with the discussion that she had where she realized that something was happening to the tree. So
that's what I was expecting. When she's like, oh, I have an idea, and she went out with her arms spread, I was like, yo, the tree's coming back. Tree's going to burst into life, the body's going to fall, and the Derulo's going to be like, what the hell? Because she's confident, she knows what she's doing, her power and abilities are stronger, and she knows what's wrong with the sun tree. So I fully expected the sun tree to bounce back to life at the end of this episode. She moved the clouds. That's still pretty cool. It's still a cool thing. Cool. But I thought that this was going to tie back to the sun tree again. But I'm assuming there's something bigger and better planned for that. But then, so Delilah is angry. She goes and calls for her steward, and he cuts her throat. Cuts his throat again the exact same way across the esophagus. She does drag him into a pentagram and pulls all the blood out of his body. So that's goes to show.
She sure does.
A little bit of blood magic going on there.
Yeah, she also grabbed her trusted book when she was doing it. So obviously, the blood magic part of her abilities does indeed require her book in some facet.
Yeah.
And maybe it's just the extent, because she was able to bring up, the ring wraiths and the dead dogs without the book, but this time she used the book. But she did raise an army.
Yeah, it was a pretty massive uprising of undead. Like, that was, and at various stages of decomposition.
Yep.
But especially that last scene where you see them at the sun tree and just this ring of ants crawling in at them was, they've got quite the face-off that they're going against.
Yeah. I will say that it was nice to see Scanlan, even though we only got to see him for the 90 seconds that we did.
But that 90 seconds was so Scanlan.
It was so Scanlan. But I got a bone to pick with Scanlan. I've got a consent bone to pick with Scanlan. He sees the couple getting freaky in the alley, and he goes, "Hey, you want a third?" And when they don't reply, he goes, "Oh, come on," and starts going towards them until they turn out to be undead.
Yeah.
That's that. For someone who was talking about consent, who's been really good about open sexuality and everything, that one gave me a little bit of a, come on, man.
Yeah, I can agree with you on that. Again, they're kind of hitting some of the Scanlan notes pretty hard and in pretty awkward ways in some of these episodes. I can see why they did it. They have the shock value of the thing turning around and coming forward, but the fact that I don't think anyone but Scanlan thought that it was anything other than the undead chewing on someone's face.
Absolutely.
So again, that kind of makes that scene all the more problematic that he kind of pushed that forward, and that also doesn't seem like you said, he's done so well with consent all the way along. For the most part, it doesn't. Well, he's done really well. It was the consent against him with a tentacle that was before. But he's been really good with consent all the way along, and this was really kind of pushing a boundary that just didn't fit the character. And this is what I have to remember what the name of this thing is. But just like there's the woman in the fridge, where you kill a woman to inspire someone, it's the same kind of thing with this, where you break a character's scene, or you break a character's traits and who they are and their character profile to fit a scene, for a joke, for a laugh, for a gag, or for a gimmick, or whatever it is. And that's what they definitely did with this, is they broke Scanlan's character to have this moment. And it was a break that definitely wasn't needed.
And I think the unfortunate part is they didn't even need to have that line and that part of it, because he could have said, "Hey, you wanna have a threesome, or want me to join?" and then have the reveal, and it would have worked fine.
Yeah, or even just tweak it a little bit.
The extra steps.
Exactly, or even just tweak it a little bit, where he starts like inching a little bit further and just saying like, "Well, do you mind if I watch?"
yeah.
Right, and then
like there were ways to not have it go in that creep direction. Which again, coming from someone who really likes Scanlan and has enjoyed how they've written him and how he's reacted to the world, I was a little bit disappointed that was his follow-up, when I don't think that's how he would have responded in other situations.
Yeah, that is true. But let's jump back to Scanlan, because we did miss one bit, and that was the tail end of Pike, where she is with the why am I blanking on the name? My brain wants to say elderflower.
Oh, the Everlight.
The Everlight, not elderflower. But the fact that it was the Everlight is talking. Hey, LJ, welcome. That the Everlight is telling her that it's the truth. She needs to face the truth. She's being burned away by the fires of purity, basically. And then we learn that Pike has cut herself off because out of guilt, because she feels that she's betraying the Everlight on the path of good by going out and partying and reveling and enjoying killing and fighting and all that stuff. And that was another mark that I had. The animation in that scene was gorgeous.
It was.
The shadows and the fire and all that stuff was so well done. And again, it was a payoff for Pike, where it's like, oh, okay, like I was being torn apart by a dichotomy within myself, where I thought I was making a mistake, and oh, okay, maybe I wasn't. This is the actual fact of what was happening. And that she's told that she does not need to change, and then she's asked, "Who are you?" And then it cuts.
Yeah. So this is an interesting scene, I think. And I guess I'll play a little bit of devil's advocate, because we did get a hint of this with LJ last week, where she said that, she didn't enjoy this payoff. She didn't like the fact that it turned into it was Pike all along, because we saw that Delilah cast a spell, hit Pike, and then all the trouble happened.
Yeah.
And exactly. And I agree now that I've thought of it that way. When I watched this episode and saw it the first couple times, I felt fine. I thought that the payoff was fine. It was a nice moment for Pike. This is something. We finally got something from her interactions in this meditative world and everything. But I also kind of understand what LJ's saying. There was obviously something happened, and we're not getting the explanation of why this happened when Delilah attacked her. Whether it was, even if it was her own mental shut off at that time, we don't get that explanation. It just kind of turns into, it was you all along.
Well, the fact
you were not the droid you're looking for.
Yeah, exactly. And like LJ said, wish it hadn't been Delilah's curse. It isn't just Delilah's curse that's holding you back. Because the other thing that irked me about this is the fact that to this very moment, including in this episode, the entire thing has been centered around the fact that the amulet was broken.
Yep.
She was hit by the magic, the amulet was broken, and my expectation this entire way is that the amulet needed to be healed. The amulet needed to be fixed. She needed to find the connection. I expected pure white light to come and bring the amulet back to life and all that stuff. And they really hit the note hard of this amulet. And even when she was being pulled under, and she had the amulet in her hands and she was looking at it, and then it came back to that tried and not very true of, hey, SJ, how are you? That tried and not very true thing of, oh, the power has been within you this whole time. And yeah, that was very problematic. But then we do get to the thing with Scanlan and that issue with the non-consent and trying to get too close to the couple he thinks are doing the deed. But I do love the fact that he runs up to the group and he's like, a whore, a whore, a whore. Vex is like, we don't have time for your whorehouse stories.
It's very Scanlan.
Yeah, that was beautiful. Hey, nice. I'm glad you enjoyed your hot shower, SJ. But that was also where I noted, too, that, again, Grog and I think the entire party are healed from all of their wounds.
Yep.
And to go through what they went through with... I mean, Scanlan was messed up. Scanlan has cuts and scratches and blood on him and stuff like that. But the rest of the group that just went through being riddled with arrows, being attacked by a whole bunch of people, running upstairs, fighting against Professor Anders, fighting against Iron Giants, fighting against Grog and each other, and they all come out without a scratch. It is extremely problematic, and that's where they really are bringing these characters into God territory, and I find that very problematic. So I'm hoping that someone loses a limb, loses an eye, or gets killed at some point in the near future. Because at this point, the only fear I have when I'm seeing a battle scene is, are they going to get out of it? Or how are they going to get out of it? And that's kind of what I'm seeing here too is, we have the horde of the undead that are coming. And in my mind, they've cast out the bat signal with a Derulo crust.
Yep.
Scanlan's warned them, and the horde is moving in. And in my mind, I don't have any suspense going into the next episode. In my mind, the next episode starts with them sitting there, facing off against the undead, struggling a little bit, and then the rest of the rebellion joining in and crushing the undead because they've seen the crest and they all get called to the bat signal. And I've got no suspense for the next episode for that scene, at least. I could be wrong,
I agree.
but that seems how it's going to play out.
Yeah, no, that's I agree with that. It's very interesting just how this episode was cut, again, because I feel like there were other more appropriate ending spots. Like, I would have been fine after Percy and Cassandra's reunion for them to cut, because then it would have given a reason when you came back to give them more interaction and dialogue before going into the rest of the episode. And I also very easily could have seen them cutting it after the undead turns to Scanlan.
Yeah.
Like, I think that would have been a much better cut. Suspenseful, like, oh shit, now there's undead.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I mean, I do really like the animation. I do really love the pullback through the clouds and seeing everything. I thought that was beautifully done. But yeah, there was many points that they could have cut beforehand. I agree with those. They would have been beautiful cuts. And I was kind of surprised. I actually paused at the Percy reunion. I was like, there's still 10 minutes left in the episode.
Yeah.
But that's one of those things where it's, they really just kind of ticked off the checklist of a bunch of stuff, truncated all of their scenes, walked to the door of suspense and then walked away from it without even knocking, and didn't lay a lot of groundwork moving forward. Like, if I didn't enjoy the show as much as I have to this point, I don't know I would have made it past this episode. Like, if I was on the fence about this show, this episode, I probably would have walked away from it.
I don't think I could have been on the fence this far in. This was episode 8. There's only 4 left. I think I even if it had been a complete train wreck up to this point, I think I'm going to be in it for the long haul because there's so few episodes left.
No. I've done that before. Like, I actually, with The Walking Dead, I think it was like halfway through one of the seasons with Negan, when Negan was in the prison cell in the basement. As soon as I saw Negan was teaching Rick's daughter and tutoring her in homework, I stopped watching it. It jumped the shark for me there, and I'm like, that's just ridiculous. Like, that's a stupid spin of the storyline, and why would they even? And I walked away. Now, I might go back to finish it now that the series is finishing. I may go back and finish watching those episodes just to see how it plays out.
The series hasn't finished yet?
No, it's in the final season, part 2 of 3. So I don't know if they're doing the final season broken out with 2 mid-season finales or what they're doing with it, but it's now that like the Walking Dead final season, 2 of 3. It's like, so is it 3 seasons that they're wrapping it up with? Is it 1 season broken into 3 parts? I don't know what they're doing. But yeah, the baby was a bad trope as well, and it's kind of like the 100 where it just started becoming repetitive over and over and over again, and they lost it. But at any rate, so I definitely have been in situations where I'm like, I was kind of starting to not enjoy this anymore. And it's the same thing with the 100. I stopped watching the 100 because it just became so pedantic and repetitive. Yeah, it did, definitely. But anyways, there's Breaking the Clouds and it pans back, and we're ready for the next episode to see what happens. There's only 4 left.
Yeah.
I'm just really disappointed that it really seemed to be that this episode was a filler episode, and it wasn't even laying groundwork. It was just filler and promises that we were made, because it almost seemed like they needed to knock off some of these promises, because it gives me the idea that there's something bigger coming. Maybe the dragons do come back. Maybe there is a much bigger enemy bad guy that's going to come up, and they've got 4 episodes to lean into that. But if that's the case, they ended that dragon fight in 2 episodes a hell of a lot better than they've ended some of these storylines up to this point.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I feel like even though they did write some checks in the past few episodes, I feel like there's still a lot of potential for them for us to cash in and get what we want in the next few. I'm just hoping that they get back to episode 2 and 3 and lean away from episode 7 and 8.
Yeah, that's the thing. I'm still excited for it. I still really want to see how things play out. I love the show. I love everything that they're doing with it. You're going to make some missteps. It's going to happen with any show that you write, no matter how well written it's done. The animation has always stood the test of time. The dialogue has always stood the test of time. Cool. It's always been beautiful. Yep. It's just storyline and pacing issues that they're facing. But yeah, the end of episode 6, I said that they avoided the saggy middle, and episode 7 and 8 stuff those words back in my mouth, because this is definitely the saggy middle of the show.
It's a late middle.
Yeah. And we'll see. Like I said, I am excited. I do want to see how it plays out. I'm excited to see where it goes. I just really want to get back to the way it was before we got into all of this.
Yeah.
I jinxed it. I'm the only one who hasn't seen the entire series yet. I'm completely flying in the dark here on this. But yeah, we'll see how it plays off. And I mean, it's nice that we did get to see Silas and Delilah a little bit in this episode. I would have liked to have seen them pop up a little bit more often, unless they are not the key bad guys in this whole thing. Then that makes a little more sense. But they were such a strong presence, and then they just faded to the shadows, except for 10 seconds here and there.
You know what is killing me is that, based on discussions about the show before it was released, I was absolutely sure that there was going to be a Silas and Delilah episode, and that we were going to get like super context dump and a lot of backstory, and it was going to be awesome. And I'm still holding out hope that it's coming, because I think they're such great villains, and I want more. And I've been so disappointed by how little we've been seeing them. So
yeah,
that was one of the things prior to this, was that Matt Mercer came out and said, because we're doing a show, we're going to be able to see the villains have conjecture and explain their motives behind closed doors instead of when they're in front of the heroes. So that made me believe that we were going to get that.
Yeah. So. And up to this point, that's been an unfulfilled promise, because we do get to see a little bit, but again, even the little bit that we get isn't giving us anything. It's giving us what they're doing in that moment to get to their greater goal. And we have no background. Like, we've never had a conversation between Silas and Delilah that actually give any context of anything that they're doing, except for the fact that they got my book. I need my book back. Let's go get my book. We need to stop them. And what are you doing? I'm saving your life. And that's really...
Or why?
Yeah, there's really not been much behind, like, you know, I would have loved to have seen the how and the why of them putting those bodies up in the tree.
Yep.
Right? There's a lot of story back there that they just walked away from.
That's my hope.
Yeah.
Still hoping. Crossing fingers.
We'll have to see. I am excited for it, though. So, and again, so anyone that's watching this, don't be disappointed. Don't be discouraged from watching. You will enjoy it if you watch. You will enjoy it. We, the three of us, are just really using our experience and our background to really dig deep and go into it. And these past 2 episodes of After the Roll may have seemed a little bit more critical Role than normal, but that's because the other episodes really didn't have much criticism. We really had to dig deep to find something that we didn't like. And it's natural to have missteps along the way.
Agreed.
So with that being said, do you have any other final thoughts in this episode?
No. I think that when they rolled the dice, this one came up as less than a 10, and hopefully the next episode will be a nat 20.
I agree with that one 100%. Well, thank you very much, Billy, for being here and for joining me on this episode of After the Roll. Like we said, LJ is off on her own side quest tonight and will be coming back from her quest of Summer Future. I'm hoping her side quest is a little more interesting than Pike's at this point. But until next time, chat, thank you very much for joining us. And for everyone that's out there, thank you very much for joining us on After the Roll of the Legend of Vox Machina. This was Season 1, Episode 8, A Silver Tongue. Awesome things mixed into it, but some pretty big missteps as well. We'll be back again for another episode next Monday. Have yourselves a great night.